to do tonight is talk with you about some topics that are ones that we may feel are really ubiquitous and really common in our own lives. And my hope is to maybe shift that dial just a tiny bit based on some of the research that we have around conflict, research that has come through the last few decades. So that's the kind of material that I will be working with here this evening. But this is casual, so like Angela said, get up, move around when you need a bio break, of whatever sort. But like I said, I hope to have a discussion with you about some of the ins and outs of conflict, some of your experiences with conflict, your opinions, the things you think you're doing really well in terms of conflict, and maybe those things you think maybe you are working on, right? This is similar to a presentation that we give to lots and lots of groups. I just talked to our nursing program a couple of weeks ago, but that information was more targeted towards sort of faculty and some of those organizational communication things. I've tried to come at this from a community-based perspective, but your examples, your input, that's really what's going to make this work, I think. So please relax, get some more snacks, okay? They do not want to have to pack all that back into their cars, do you? I see you're shaking your head. Okay, so let's help them out and give them a lighter load on their way out, okay? So I'm Nora, it's right there on the screen. I work for Missouri State. I direct our Center for Dispute Resolution, which has been around for 25-ish years, and I go back with the center around 20 of those years. And it became part of my job a couple of years ago, and it's really been fascinating to get to really spend a lot of time thinking about conflict and get myself up to date on some of the research. I feel I'm in a department where we teach a lot of public speaking. Any of you who are survivors of MSU and good old fundamentals of public speaking, everyone gets to take that class. I don't like to say we have to take that class, right? But everybody gets to take it. And one thing that we teach in that class is that it's important for our listeners to know why we are credible on a topic. So we do that in lots of different ways, by citing our experiences and by citing sources. And in this case, I'll tell you, I came to Springfield. I'm not a native. I came here in the mid-90s and moved from Chicago, from right in the city of Chicago, a mile north of Wrigley Field. And I moved into Roundtree. So you all might have heard of that neighborhood, and you know how serene it is, correct? You know how there's never any problem in that neighborhood. No? They're very mellow about any changes that might ever happen, very relaxed. So bopped around a few fixer-uppers in Roundtree, and then had the chance to move to University Heights, which, you know, again, serene, mellow, no issues. And now, I mean, it could be me, because I moved 12 years ago, and University Heights was kind of serene then, but anyway. And I've got kids who also live in Springfield. One's really active in the Grant Avenue corridor area where they live, and another one is in Grant Beach, and actually bought a house there at age 19, and right down the street from the Fairbanks. And so that has been really fascinating to see that neighborhood develop too. So I'm an enthusiast for neighborhoods, and it's really fun to see the different locations where y'all are coming from, because it certainly looks really familiar to me. But I'm excited to have this chance to talk with you about one of my favorite topics, which is conflict. So what comes to mind if you see that word, right? A little more fun on a Scrabble board, maybe worth a few points anyway. But what kind of words does that word evoke for you? And sorry, I know some of you in here, so I'm not calling on you because I know your names, or if I can read your name tag. What word or words come to mind if you see the word, or when you hear the word conflict?
Awkward and uncomfortable.
Awkward and uncomfortable?
Stressful.
Stressful. I'm hearing stress over here.
Argumentative.
Argumentative.
Differences.
Differences. I'm in the communication department. We teach a semester-long class on argumentation. It's not a dirty word around my department at all. Differences, anxiety. Thematically, what kinds of words are you hearing and saying?
Emotional words.
Negative.
They are going a little to the negative, and one of the things that we'll talk about are some of the positive aspects of conflict as we move through this material. Conflict certainly and obviously has negative sides. That's the one that gets a lot of the attention, right? And in our brains, psychologists have found that we have something called negativity bias. And so that tends to make some of those negative thoughts really sticky for us. So if I ask people, what's the last compliment you got? What's the last thing someone said to you that you thought, oh, that makes my day. I'm going to remember that. You're still searching, you're scrolling through, you're still opening tabs in your head. Okay, how about the last time someone hurt your feelings or insulted you? You're there, right? Mentally, that's that negativity bias. And there's, who knows, developmentally, why humans hang on to that. It's certainly for us to learn something from it. But then, like anything that we can learn from and know about humans, then we know that we have the job to do something with that information, right? So that if we know that this is how our factory settings go, well, as humans with great big brains, we can then manage that, right? That some more information, some new tactics, that could change some of our word associations potentially. I mean, it might, it may not. Your mileage will vary on this. But one thing, I'm in the communication department, so I really care about words. And I have this really old-fashioned idea that words mean things. And the power of words, the superpower that we have as humans to create meaning with each other, that's what gets me out of bed every day, right? And it's really what makes being a human or humaning so challenging and also so rewarding, is that opportunity to exchange words with someone and then think about things in a way that we both think is funny or important or profound, right? We might take that for granted because we're so used to it. But it's really powerful to be able to make meaning with other human beings. And it's powerful in the neighborhood setting for sure. It's powerful obviously in families, at work, all these different places where we are. So I like to start at a definition. And this is a definition based on the work of folks in my discipline, in the communication discipline. This is a definition that you'll find in the books. So I use a lot of Dr. Corey Floyd's work on interpersonal communication, and so this is one that he uses, and I really like this one a lot for several reasons that I'll talk about. I rarely read slides because I'm assuming everyone can read, but I'm just going to say here that conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving their goals. And this doesn't have any positive or negative valence per se. It's not saying this is something we should avoid, this is something we should launch into. This is describing it, right? Helping us get our arms around what conflict is, and then, relatedly, what conflict is not. And I don't know about you, but if you're alive in 2025, it's pretty easy to feel like you're in conflict a lot of the time. Did I see your hand? Did you want to jump in? Oh, fidgeting is fine. Go ahead and fidget. I just want to make sure that if somebody wants to weigh in, that you do that. But I certainly feel as if I'm in conflict with things, like the weather. I have felt I'm in conflict with the weather today. But guess what? We're not interdependent. Not even a little bit. The humidity does not care about my flippy hair, right? Not at all. I can be often in a conflict with time. You can ask people in my life about that. My timeliness. I'm always great on something like this. I never make it to class late. But in other ways, I'm a little more fluid around time. Okay? And so I can feel as if I'm in a conflict with the clock but I'm not. Again, the clock does not need me. I need the clock. We're not interdependent. And in traffic, I just drove here, like I said, and I can easily start to think I'm in conflict with the person in front of me without their blinker on, who's going way too slowly for the traffic, who should have changed lanes. I'm seeing some people nodding because you also drive with these people, right? And then that perception that when we are in traffic, that everybody else is the traffic, we're not, right? But until I hit my horn, I'm not in conflict with those people because I haven't expressed myself. My sister's a very famous road ragey inside her car thing. She's expressing herself a lot, but they don't hear it, so it's a little bit different. We are interdependent when we're driving, but usually in a very fleeting manner, right? Not for very long. With people who we see a lot, we are interdependent, right? We need them, they need us. And the conflict interpersonally doesn't happen until or unless one of those parties says something. Makes it clear what is going on in their mind. Has anybody else had big arguments with other people? You are the author of both sides of that argument, and the other person has no idea, right? This is sounding familiar. You're not in a conflict with that person necessarily. I mean, you might be, because we can time travel in our heads and have these conversations. That's cool. But until and unless we mention what's happening to someone with whom we're interdependent, we are not technically in a conflict. So I don't know if this helps you feel any better or any worse about your conflicts, but it helps me get my arms around and be able to distinguish from annoyance and irritation and really understand about conflict, because that does need some bandwidth. And it has some really positive outcomes if I can give it that bandwidth. So I talked a little bit about what I sometimes perceive as what conflict is, but I'm curious about you. Examples that you have around conflict, something that you're thinking about now might fit this definition?
Having very different values with the people with whom you're forced or choosing to pursue goals with.
Different values, yep. Absolutely. Common cause of conflict. What are you thinking about?
What comes to mind for me was a situation where we were trying to conduct a meeting and we had a disruptive attending person that it didn't matter what we were trying to accomplish, they were on their own goal. They were headed a different road.
Yeah, and that can definitely be tricky because we've all got different needs, and the work of the psychologist William Glasser said that, I mean, he said that we will always try to meet our unmet needs, and all humans have basic needs, of course, to stay alive, but then our sort of mental and emotional needs are for freedom, fun, power, and belonging. And so if we are trying to meet our freedom, fun, power, and belonging needs, perfectly appropriate, depending on the context, right? I don't know about any of you, but I have been in some meetings in my life where I felt like there's some unmet power needs happening. So there's a choice theory, there's a whole book about choice theory, very interesting stuff, if you want to read more about that.
I was kind of interested in your thought about quiet conflict. Quiet conflict.
Oh,
Because I have
conflict
that.
comes at every
I just
decibel
wondered
level.
about that because I
For
walk
sure.
in that all the time, and I'm like, you don't want to. You know you need to bring it up, but then you don't know how to. You're at a loss on how to communicate it with an individual that seems to think they know everything.
Or is clearly on a different kind of, has a
Yeah.
different kind of an agenda.
The value,
The values
different
are
value
different.
concept.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting for the quietness of that. So how to approach that properly.
Absolutely, and we all come at every situation we are ever in carrying in our identities and our experiences that will inform how we think about conflict or what we perceive as a conflict, right? And this is, like I said, I just like to put some fences around things so that we know what we're talking about. And I like this definition because I think it keeps conflict in a little bit more manageable space than sometimes it can be. I'm still not saying it's easy,
Right.
but it boils it down a tiny bit.
Well, that's why I was just with the express struggle.
Yep.
Sometimes it's not expressed verbally.
Right? And
It comes out physically. That's what I'm saying. You know,
And emotional
it's like-
contagion is also a real thing.
Yeah.
The research is showing increasingly that not only do our brains sync up when we're around other people, but we can catch each other's emotions.
Mhm.
And that is real and it's testable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I experiment with my students on this all the time. It's amazing. It's very fun to do. But so we intuitively sometimes feel that someone else is not expressing verbally something, but we can't not communicate as humans. We are always communicating. And nonverbal communication is continuous. That's another thing that I teach. I'm happy to talk about that. I have a little plan to touch on it. But yes, we
Okay.
can't not communicate. What are you thinking about?
I think I'm struggling with the interdependent part, because we've run into kind of a repetitive issue where somebody is not being disruptive in a like rowdy or, you know, type of way, but in just throwing statements out that are meant to make it look as though the people running the meeting are doing something, but if you try to get to the core of that, what actually it is, they talk in circles and say nothing.
We are going to get to some circular communication.
So there's
Maybe you saw my
trying to
slides.
resolve anything,
Right.
is we don't even know what we're trying to resolve.
Well, and I don't know if this is anything helpful at all, but these are very typical human patterns of communication, and I know that, you know, you all know this. I do think there are some strategies, there are some communication tactics and skills that we can learn and develop that can't solve all of this, could possibly mitigate some of it. And it's, like I said, all based in the research. I saw someone's hand here in the middle. Yeah.
I was just wondering if Angela's question was geared more for the non-communicative between you and somebody or
Oh.
between two other people?
Both.
Okay.
Basically
Yes.
between me and my daughter,
Okay.
of which I live with, and they're totally on different ends of the spectrum on 95% of everything.
Yeah.
But I love her anyway.
Yeah, conflict is thorny. And I will say that we're in a culture that tells us all constantly that we're very polarized and we're in conflict, and I'm not saying that we're not, there's some really important things that we can disagree about, but we are not in a culture that necessarily equips us with how to deal with conflict. And I'd make the critique that we handle listening in a very similar way. And again, in my department, we have a semester-long class on effective listening. And listening is something that we expect people to do and don't train them how to do it. Particularly students. We expect them to do it for over a decade, constantly, and we don't tell them what that means. Or teach them the communication skills, because listening is also a communication skill. So it's pretty likely that in all of our lives, we are interacting with other people who don't necessarily have much more listening or conflict literacy than we have. And part of that is just because the structure of our culture doesn't build a lot of that in for a lot of people. Now, some people get lots more training in that than others. So I've got a little bit of a list here. Like I said, the interdependent parties, that's one of the tests of conflict. There usually is some kind of disagreement where there's a mismatch of goals, of values, of the content, lots of things. There can be misunderstanding, obviously. We've had those experiences. Conflict is both negative and positive. We'll get to the positive stuff. I'm hopeful that when you walk out of here, you've got a little positive something about conflict that you're thinking about. Conflict is also normal. There's no significant relationship that any of us have that is conflict-free, I would guess. I wouldn't think so, but maybe, and if you've got an example, share it. Conflict is also complex, and we've already heard some of those examples that show us the complexity here. These are only a few of the aspects of conflict. So here, I said, I think it'd be good to look at this a little more positively, and I'm telling you all this bad stuff about conflict still, but we're getting there, okay? I promise. But these are just some of those factors that need to be present when we're thinking about what a conflict is. Like I said, I think it's helpful to think about what it is not. Conflict is not bullying. Bullying is something different. They pal around together. I'm not saying they're never hanging out, but they are qualitatively different kinds of ideas. Bullying is obviously something that we need to pay attention to. Bullying involves unequal power. It continues even when it's clear that there's hurt involved, that someone is being harmed, and it is something that is designed specifically to hurt others. So some of the conflicts or some of the misunderstandings in some of our lives are not necessarily bullying, but I am positive, again, that we've all seen bullying in some ways, right? At lots of different levels. And it's really important to pay attention to that. So I don't want to minimize that at all. Interpersonal violence is not conflict, right? That's something else. I mean, it's conflict, but it's not, it's bullying. It has to do with power dynamics, and it deserves we've studied that in a somewhat different way, like that interpersonal violence. I'm not saying it's not. So it's just not the same kind of conflict as a disagreement, as a misunderstanding. Does that make
It's the
sense?
word you use when you talk about, words have meanings.
Yes.
And you
Yeah,
say
yeah.
quite a bit.
And I didn't, and that's totally understandable. I'm thinking about this from, I also teach interpersonal communication, so I should have backgrounded it with that, right?
Okay.
So when we're talking about speech, verbal acts is how we think about them.
Okay.
That we study that in a somewhat different category. Or we analyze that in a different category, I should say. We have to pay attention to anything, obviously, that is criminal, that is designed to hurt others. It takes a different kind of attention and focus. And obviously, when you're dealing with those kinds of situations in our groups and in our communities, that's another level, right?
Absolutely correct.
But what I think that humans can do productively is get our arms around common conflict, for a garden variety conflict, for lack of a better term. Does that make sense? Sorry to make that a little bit muddy there. I certainly don't mean to. We're still talking a little bit about the negative aspects of conflict, but this is where I'm sort of fencing them off a little bit. When I'm talking about conflict, I am not talking about things that are necessarily at a criminal kind of a level, right? I'm talking about interpersonal, verbal kinds of conflict like you all have described. But negative experiences, we heard some of those words come out earlier. I'm guessing you've had negative experiences because of hurt, anxiety, stressful, right? Dread is very common. People mention that as something that sort of suffuses their brain space when they are fearing a conflict or when they are in a conflict, when there is that expressed struggle. Other thoughts, examples?
Avoidance.
Avoidance.
No.
Yep, we're going to talk more about avoidance too. And sometimes avoidance maybe can work well for you, but it is not a good long-term strategy.
Not often.
Not often. And it doesn't work over the long term. And so in long-term relationships, that doesn't get you there, right? How about you, your family, people you know? How's conflict affected you negatively?
I'll go with Bruce. I think when it's avoided and people are afraid of it and it's brushed under the proverbial rug too long, I think that's when it grows and becomes much worse than it was originally.
exactly. Well, and then we start to get into even more problematic things.
For sure.
Better to deal with less under the rug, not put stuff under there, right?
Well, isn't there sometimes when you do have conflict and it gets a little heated, I think sometimes avoiding it, getting to yourself, thinking about it before it escalates even further to identify why you are getting upset. And
Absolutely.
then going back at it to say, okay, this is what I was feeling or thinking. Is this what the page you was on?
And I've got a slide later on about that
Sorry,
too. You're such
sorry.
an advanced group.
I am
think
so sorry.
Which is fine, you can have these slides, no problem. So yeah, the Gottmans work, John and Julie Gottman are a couple, they've been married for 50 years. So they know a lot about conflict, personally and professionally. And taking a break, and you'll see that later on, is one of the things they have found out in their research is very powerful. Not the long-term break, but
Right.
the I need 20 minutes to recalibrate break.
Take a breather.
And so that's actually coming up on some tips here in a bit. Don't be sorry.
I didn't want to get ahead of you there.
You're not, you're doing great. I really appreciate that. But we are always thinking about problems as well as solutions. That's what y'all are doing, and that can really make this even more complex, right? So just to wrap up on the negative, we've got just a little bit more, and you've already brought some of this up. But even if we weren't concerned about our own emotional toll that we pay for conflict, and this number goes up every year. I just updated this for a session that we did a couple of weeks ago. The financial costs of conflict in just the United States alone, 359 billion in paid hours. And at least 2.5, 3 hours of time per employee per week are lost to some kind of conflict. So when you multiply that out over our working weeks, this is a really expensive problem. I think we all can care about it, obviously, on an individual level, but it's something that costs us culturally not to be able to do conflict very well. And I'd make that critique of this culture, that we don't do conflict very well, despite how ubiquitous it is. So we are getting to what happens when we do conflict a little bit better here in a moment. But these are some things that you've already brought up in terms of things that can happen if we don't work through a conflict. There are lots of good reasons to do it. Yeah, what do you think about it?
Okay, a lot of, my problem with conflict is I'm not in the conflict. It's happening around me, and it upsets me greatly. I don't know how to deal with, they're arguing, make them stop, you know. I have a problem, I want things right, and yet I don't feel I can push into the middle of it because it's not my battle.
Well, it not being your battle, I mean, it's space that you're in, so that can feel
So I feel
very
like I'm part of
disruptive
it.
mentally, absolutely. And again, because we all come into every circumstance we ever go into with our own thinking about conflict, how it looks, how it's affected us in other situations, we can't separate ourselves from that. Again, there's a lot of research about that. So I'd say that, and I'm a sociologist, not a psychologist, and so what we always hear is thou shalt not practice psychology. We draw a lot on psychological studies and communication, but I'm always joking and say I'm really interested in groups. But what psychologists say is that we need to really honor our feelings and our reactions in the moment. And that we need to pay attention to anything where we're feeling triggered, where we're feeling upset because of other people's communication. But I think you're very astute to say that's not my battle. But humans are wired really deeply to learn from and respond to other humans at all stages of our development. We can't really ever turn that off. We start doing it the second we arrive. We start watching other people's faces to try to figure out if we're safe in this situation. And so we really can't turn that off. But we can sort of shift focus, and I think you've already done it, thinking, well, they're working on something that does not involve me, but if you don't feel comfortable in that setting to the extent that you can, you've got to step back from that. But also sometimes people are doing that because that is sort of culturally how they've learned to communicate and how they've learned to connect. And I know that in the Gottman's work and in other folks who study interpersonal communication, there are some people who sound as if they're bickering or fighting a lot, but that's their style of communication, but it sounds pretty abrupt to someone else. Or it can't. Sure, what do you think?
Primarily, the situation we've had in our meetings is what she's saying, do you step in to try to take care of this situation where the person or persons that should be controlling the situation aren't.
Yeah.
And that kind of comes into it. And I did have the situation where
Right.
when the gentleman just went on and on and on, he was trying to present something, he got totally ridiculous. Well, I controlled it, because I said, well, here's what we're doing,
Right.
and we're gonna move on to the next thing, because you've got to find a point to stop this and so forth. But the gist is, if somebody else is supposed to be controlling it,
Yep.
I don't think there's a bit of a problem that I guess you have to work out between the other people, but so at some point you got to step in and control it. If the other people, you step on toes, that's kind of where the situation is as far as what can I do or should I do. In my opinion, if it's not getting control, somebody has to take over and take control.
And it is tricky, especially in all volunteer groups, and I have some
Yeah.
experience with this too. So I was a PTA president, right now I'm on the Art Museum Board, and so I've spent lots of time, not a member of the League of Women Voters, right? So like I've worked in lots of volunteer capacities, and sometimes those groups where no one is paid and people have the same amount of power, unless they're the chair or the president of that organization, then things can get a little messy, and I get that. But that's why structures matter. I don't love like Robert's rules of orders and rules of order particularly. That's not my deal. I'm not very parliamentarian minded. But I know that when I'm in those structures, I'm grateful for policies and procedures. And I think sometimes in groups where they set up particular mechanisms for people to talk, time limits, topic limits, those kinds of things, can sometimes help a group to sort things out until some of those dynamics shift. But this is certainly different in organizations where everyone's a volunteer. And we're actually going to talk about some of that too, in terms of, well, then how do we do that? What does that look like? What are y'all thinking about? Anything else you want to jump in on?
I was
Yes?
thinking about something a little similar. We do have, so in Roundtree, we have lots of conflict, even among our board members. And we actually usually handle that very positively with hearing everybody out. And, it's not uncommon for somebody to change their opinion based on somebody else's perspective that maybe they haven't thought of. But we do have a situation where we have a particular person, and it's an issue every time they come. We have kind of just switched it up where the agenda will get changed. And whatever item we know it is
It's going to be the issue.
it gets moved to the end so that we can get business done and deal with people that have come, either people to present or PAR officers and stuff. We're not taking up their time with those issues.
Yeah.
And it doesn't resolve,
Right.
it doesn't resolve the thing,
It
but
just
it
moves it
limits,
along.
it does limit what it affects.
Yeah.
You can't take care of business.
Right.
Right.
It's
I
a
mean,
problem.
that unmet needs thing is real. It does not matter, and trust, I'm on a university campus. It does not matter how many letters people have behind their name, how many degrees they have, how much power they have. You still see people enacting their unmet needs in lots of different contexts. I mean, I've observed it over and over again, and I'm just sort of happy that I have that little way that I can understand it. Works for me.
If you want to hear some of those folks, tune in every other Monday night to the remonstrance section
Yeah.
of the city council meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's there for a reason, so
Yeah.
we do have an outlet.
Oh, my name was on, at a city council meeting this week because got reappointed to the art museum board. So I got a little email that apparently, anyway, that was Monday and I totally missed it, but anyway.
But a remonstrance
At
area
least it
of
was
the
mentioned.
agenda is
Yeah.
anything, you can
Yeah.
talk about anything you want that's not on the agenda. That's not on the agenda.
And
So
it's-
it opens it up for people to have
Exactly.
that outlet.
And it leaves a place for that. And
Yeah,
honestly,
there's a place for it.
I mean,
right.
I've been teaching for a really long time, and I've had students who've had a tremendous range of, let's say, maturity come through my classes over the years. And I have adjusted assignments, I've adjusted how we set class up based on what I can see will be the needs of the group. There are some people who are extremely expressive, who work out their thinking through talking, and that is okay for them in some contexts. But if they are in a group with 25 other people, where we have an agenda, right? We've really got to respect the time of all of those people, not just the person who works things out through talking. And so I have done a similar thing to what your neighborhood group has done, which is sometimes adjust, because you've got to build communication structures that work for most of the people most of the time. That's what I think, in order to be productive, because we're trying to get some goals accomplished in a class or in a neighborhood, right? Anything else you thinking about? So let's talk about some of the positive aspects of conflict. Maybe you've been waiting for that. Can conflict be positive? You already know my feeling about this, but if you are nodding, if you're saying, yeah, I think it can, how so? Any examples, thoughts about that?
It can lead to personal growth.
It can. The research has shown that for decades, that when conflicts are resolved, that whatever that looks like, and that doesn't mean solved necessarily, but when we move through conflict, that we have a stronger relationship with the persons or the person with whom we're in the conflict, but we have so much more self-awareness, and we are better equipped to deal with the inevitable conflicts that are coming up. So positive experiences you've had, maybe? Anything specific?
Just being able to work out what
Yeah.
the conflict was about, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you end up understanding another person differently, better? Understand yourself better? I mean, there's some positives there, right? And then where's the line? How does this shift between negative and positive? What has to happen for you? Maybe.
Get my way.
Get your way. Oh, fair enough, David. Fair enough.
Right.
At least you've made it clear to all of us.
Both sides feeling hurt.
Feeling hurt. So there are very few. Human beingness is really diverse, right? And we all have lots of different ways we come at everything. We do, but universally, human beings want to be heard and understood to the extent that's possible. That is something that cuts across all sorts of social groups. It seems to be very inherent to being a human, that we want to be heard.
I take that a step further and just say that even if you don't agree, you at least respect the other opinion. Like it's okay to say that you grew up differently than me, we have different opinions, and I respect the fact that you believe this way, but I still believe this way.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the agree to disagree.
Well, and candidly, I mean, there are a lot of areas in life where it is okay to agree to disagree. And we only can know for ourselves what our own values are in terms of where we won't agree to disagree, but we can still hear someone else out, right? Other thoughts?
I have a thought.
Yeah, lay it on us.
My grandfather died in 1943, so his obituary said he always had two ways of doing things, his way and the wrong way. So anytime any of my cousins, I'm never boss you. Okay.
Very persuasive, but not false.
We just always say, wow, your grandpa. And none of us ever met him, so. Wow.
Yeah, but those family stories populate our, our mental landscape.
Because all 16 of us are exactly right, and the other 15 are idiots.
There's a Dutch thing too, so my whole family's all Dutch American, and so that's sort of this culturally Dutch thing where people are like, yeah, I know that I'm right. It's just how we function, it's how we operate culturally. What do you think about this?
I like the second bullet point, fostering creativity.
The research all shows that greater creativity comes when we can move through conflict and not just flee from it. Yeah. So have you seen that in your,
Last week, there were several people in this room that were in a meeting that fostered creativity from conflict.
Okay, well, I was going to say probably in architecture, I would think
Yeah.
you got that figuring stuff out. It seems to me you'd get to the better ideas then through some conflict with materials, with space or something.
Conflict constraints.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, those limitations that are part of that definition earlier.
Yeah.
I see a hand over here and then I'm coming to you.
With positive aspects of this, my mother used to say, there doesn't always have to be a right or wrong about a situation. There can be two rights, and you're just coming at it from different angles.
Yeah.
So, to me, sometimes, it's like, okay, so then what do we do with that? They can both be positive
Right.
situations to resolve the conflict. Then you still have another conflict of which one to take. That would be a complex kind of situation.
Yeah, and
You
that's
go,
the
wait a
human
minute, but I'm
condition.
still right.
Yeah. I mean, and that's
So-
what it means to be human is that.
During a group, I think that's where the vote comes in.
Well,
You know,
truly, I mean, that's where a
majority vote,
structure.
You just gotta
Yeah.
bring it, because it's like, well, okay, that was all good.
A structure can help us there.
Yeah.
Policies, procedures, especially when we're a group trying to
Yeah.
accomplish
That's the
something.
point.
Yeah.
That's the whole point.
That
Not
gives some protection to
personally,
everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I hate writing syllabi, which I'm going to have to do in a few weeks, but I'm always glad to have them because the students and I need to know where the guardrails are for every class I ever teach. So, sorry to make you wait.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think if conflict arises from your expectations not being met, a really valuable outcome could be your expectations changing because that can be really useful.
And again, this is coming up later, but we don't know what we don't know. And learning is not necessarily comfortable, unfortunately, but that sometimes we need that perspective shift. And this is how we can find it really, is moving through some difficulties. So there are some communication patterns that we see over and over again that lead sometimes into conflicts or can make things a little bit more complicated. So I've just got a very few examples, but organizational rules and culture can be barriers to communication, and they can also give opportunities for communication. So it's how we organize those rules and how we establish that culture that will make all the difference, potentially, right? To be able to work together positively. If people have a fear of speaking up, or they fear being retaliated against, then that is going to shift their communication really obviously. There can be a chilling effect, sometimes from the leadership or the lack of leadership in groups we're moving through, and people will do a thing called self-silencing. And silence is, I spent a lot of time in class on silence, because it's a really important way that we communicate. Like I said, we can't not communicate. And self-silencing is something that we need to pay a lot of attention to, because who is it who has to self-silence and why, and in what contexts? I think those are really important questions for us to follow up on. Because if the same people are silencing themselves across different kinds of contexts, well, we're never getting their perspective or their expertise.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I fall short of it all the time, but I'm definitely trying to set up classes that I teach as spaces where people feel that they can bring whoever they are into that space. It does not mean that students will speak up in every class period. I have that right in my syllabus. There are lots of ways for people to be involved. I don't necessarily need you to speak in every class if that's not something that you do. I was not a big talker in class, which might sound shocking to you now. And my dad always told me I had the gift of gab. He did not mean that as a compliment. And I got a BS in communication, so more communication studying. But I'm actually a pretty quiet person, but I'm really conscious of why am I quiet? Am I adding something to this? Do I know something about this? Do I have a question? I'll always jump in, but as a student in a class, I did not really necessarily talk that much, so I don't assume that my quiet students aren't attentive, right? But I am concerned if a student says to me, I don't feel like I can say the thing I'm thinking. That's self-silencing. So we've got to pay attention to that. That fear and uncertainty that can come in, that is up to us when we're leading groups to, as much as possible, welcome people into the conversation that we're having in our group, and also have some clarity about where we're going, what the plan is. Brene Brown says, clarity is kind. And so I think that when we're in a group setting, we need to make things really clear. And by the way, I'm missing an art museum board meeting tonight to be here because, so that's a meeting where I normally am, but that's an example of a meeting that I have been participating in now for the past few years, and it is extremely well run. I know exactly how things are going to go every time. So I don't have any fear or uncertainty in that particular group because of the structure, right? There are not in that group right now, I'm part of it, what I have observed to be negative communication patterns. So a board like that, that's a public board, there are employees of the museum who are there. They have a different kind of a role than those of us who are volunteering to be board members. And in some groups like that, you will see some negative communication patterns. So if anybody, when you're seeing Nick Nelson or whatever, say I said good things about how the art museum is run. But that's been my observation as someone who studies communication, is that there are a lot of, and the meetings are open. You can come check this out for yourself. But there are lots of other meetings that you all are having that I know also have some positive patterns of communication. So what you want is to create that culture and that atmosphere where people feel that they can be involved and be heard, right? And that their opinion matters and that they're listened to. Jump in.
Is it okay or helpful to self-silence when, for instance, something's thrown out there and you answer just specifically the question, but you don't go any further, you just stay silent about what you may think is going on,
So,
because it's just going to further.
Peggy?
Yes.
Okay. So my answer to almost everything in class is always, it depends. It depends. I mean, I think in that context of the neighborhood group, yes, I would be very clear and specific and responsive to that thing only. Because, again, sometimes people are trying to meet their belonging needs, or they're there for social reasons, or they're working out some power stuff, or whatever, and I feel like I just try to be as to the point as possible. Sometimes, and I will say that if I have a student in class who is one of those more dominant students, that then I will be sure to have another conversation with that student. Now that's a little bit different. There's a power dynamic there. I have the ability to give that. They're earning a grade in my class. It's part of their permanent record. It's a different power dynamic. I'm not analogizing.
We've offered to
So,
have
Yeah,
multiple.
yeah, and that's a
You want
good,
to sit down and talk about what?
good for you, and I know that
And-
that's,
No.
yeah.
So
Well,
that's, I mean, those are just the strategies.
Sure.
that we kind
It
of
sounds
talked
as
about.
if you
I don't know
are-
There's something else that we can be.
maybe,
Yeah.
I mean, I've got some other, what I think are pretty applicable strategies coming up that maybe something would work that you haven't used yet. Whoops, hold on, I thought I had a little thingy here, okay. Common ways of handling conflict, and so you're already thinking about this. Avoiding it is one. Confronting it and handling it poorly, or confronting it and handling it well, which that's our goal, is to figure that bit out. So I've got some things coming up that maybe will give you a little bit more meat on that. So when you think about conflict being inevitable and around, that, huh? Oh, did you want me to go back?
No, you just keep going, I'll do it later.
Because I will send you, you send me an email, I'll send you all this, no problem.
Oh, cool.
But when we think about how do we move toward more productive conflict, I mean, that's really our goal in the CDR. The name of the thing is dispute resolution. Well, resolution is a pretty heavy lift sometimes. Certainly evolution of disputes is something that we're interested in, moving it from that very negative space into a more neutral, maybe potentially a positive space is really what we're looking for. Constructive conflict gets us toward goal accomplishment. Just like you said, it can be creative, it can be really powerful and positive, and it emphasizes what we're sharing, the interest that we have in having strong neighborhoods. Not just the neighborhood associations, but strong neighborhoods and appealing neighborhoods for us to be in, right? So that's kind of how I think about this. And like I said, I am no stranger to conflict. I have a spouse, I have 2 grown children, I have 1 sibling, so I certainly know things about conflict. But what I get to study has helped me in each of those contexts as well as other kinds of groups, right? So some strategies for resolution. So here we're going to move into sort of 3 ideas. And the first one is that we really need to start with ourselves. And so in a couple of minutes, I've got an assessment for you to take, and then we'll see how the results of that show up here in just a moment. So we'll get to that. But you'll see that little graphic several times. So the Start With You box is bigger right now, so that's where we are. But just regret to inform you that you're the only person you can control, which that's a drag, because I have 100 new students every semester. I would love to be able to control them more than I do, but I cannot. So I keep trying to work on myself, which is a lifelong project, as it turns out. But we've got to figure out, what do we want? What's important to me, right? So what was important to me when I was in the PTA or in other boards I've been on, right? That was different than what it is compared to the Art Museum Board or any other groups that I'm part of. What I want for other people, obviously, is going to be affected by my relationship with them and by what it is we're trying to do together. But I've always got to go back to, is my behavior moving me toward what I want, where I want to go? All behavior is communication. Because we can't not communicate. So we've got to think about, I've got to have that clarity that Brene Brown talks about for myself. What's my goal here? What do I want to happen on the other side of this experience? So there are lots and lots of these little memes out there, things that you can control. But we can get our arms around the things that we can do. And if we did that, we might potentially have a little less conflict. Because sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I think someone else just needs to work out their stuff, that they're talking to me about something that I really, sounds like a you problem more than a me problem. But when it is a me problem, I promise you I'll get on board with that, right? So I try to be really clear about what is it that I can control and how do I think about, how do I engage with conflict? So we're going to do an assessment called the TKI, and this is the Thomas Kilmann instrument. This is something that's been around for a long time. It's heavily normed and validated. So I'm going to pass around a little packet of papers in a second, and don't be dismayed. It looks like a lot. It's really not that bad. And by 7:15, we're going to start talking about this. There are a few open-ended questions on the back. There's some other material. So this should be plenty of time for you to go through, assess yourself and how you look at conflict. And then we will chat about the different kinds of conflict styles that people have, and in a lot more depth. This is just a little simple one. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm just going to hand those off. Sure. So, and if you need something to write with, let me know, because I think I brought in a couple of extra pens.
Did you not get one now?
I'll give you two.
Are you communicating?
Did he take it from me?
I don't know.
I love that.
Positive conflict there.
I didn't get one.
Give what?
My kids, but then they did it.
Conflict.
Accommodate.
Thank you.
We don't have to read each other's.
This is for you. And there's no style that's better or worse. We'll keep talking about